Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here. So, this is a giant TWAB. This is a giant TWAB. I'm not going to call it a TWID. Also, I finally enabled HDR. We're going to kind of see how things look from here. See if things are all good. So, this should look pretty crisp and clean for y'all. First off, developer stream's going to be happening June 24th. I am likely going to be working, so unfortunately I will not be streaming it or anything. However, we do have a lot of stuff to go over. Okay. You can get that special emblem. Not really going to be discussing Ride of the Nine. Do keep in mind the new expansion releases on July 14th. Or 15th. July 14th or 15th, I don't remember releases there. I just know the raid is July 19th, which I will be streaming that. But melee damage is changing. I'm not going to read all of this verbatim, because I'm going to get to a lot of this stuff. However, how it's been working currently is that, as obviously you can see here, essentially it'll be increased. Like 250% damage bonuses are going to will multiply to 125%. But now they're just going to be adding. So the high stuff of melee damage is not really going to be happening. What they've said is goal with these changes is to make it easier to create a personalized build the way you want. Combinations of melee abilities and build crafting atoms are now much stronger than they were. We are very excited to see what melee abilities are going to be happening. Also, some other things they've decided to work around with melees is you're not going to be one-shotting bosses. So additionally, balancing the game becomes more and more difficult. More sources of increased damage we add. We do not want to have to choose between bosses being one-shot by players who are stacking as many buffs as possible, or bosses feeling like bullet sponge to players who are not. Which I think is perfectly fine. I think it's more so aimed at Titan specifically, but Bungie makes up for it. I'm not necessarily going to go into the systemic changes. However, importantly, melee damage no longer scales Scorch and Ignition damage by melee attacks. That does hit Incinerator Snap, and Consecration. So, first big change, the glaive melees are now considered a type of unpowered melee damage. So they now are going to work with Syntheseps, Knockout, Offensive Bulwark, Combination Blow, Spark of Feedback, Worm God's Caress, Banner of War, and Stylus Executioner. Do keep in mind all of those changes are going to be happening as well. Glaive Melee now triggers all effects that are triggered by any melee ability. I'm assuming this means it's gonna proc Swashbuckler and Pugilist, I would assume? Which, something to mention here. Of course, I am double checking. Okay, so unfortunately, we really only have one perk in the entire game that buffs melee damage, and that's 1-2 punch, but I'm assuming due to these changes that they're planning on adding more. So, that's nice and lovely, and by the way, just a little bit of a refresher as I attempt to double check with what stuff does. Never mind, I am not going to be able to. I'm not completely sure what Spark of Feedback does necessarily, because I can't really double check it, but I think it increases melee damage when you're surrounded by combatants. But glaive melee damage in PvE has been adjusted to compensate for the increased access to melee damage and increased effects. So glaive melee damage against minors and majors has been reduced by 40%, which is quite substantial. Against champions and mini bosses has been reduced by 28%. That mostly affects Winterbite. And glaive melee damage against bosses and vehicles has been reduced by 50%. That one hits Winterbite especially hard. Now, ability changes for melees. All classes, Facet of Courage, melee damage bonus increasing from 10 to 50%. Oh, okay. Melee damage bonus increased from 75% to 100%. Now works with glaive. Now works with glaive melees. No longer decrease. So essentially, I'm just going to address this right now. Any perks or aspects that got reduced when you were using Syntheseps, Liar's Handshake, Knockout, Wormgrow's Caress, 1-2 Punch, or Winter Sky, no longer are being reduced when you're using those, which is nice. The first massive change is Roaring Flames. Maximum PvE damage bonus increased from 73% to 200%. Now, this does affect melee damage, however, this does affect grenades as well and supers, making Pyrogales a little bit more worth it. Warring Flames increases now solar ability damage, and Glaive melee is always kinetic. So that means that Glaive melees are always going to be kinetic. So that means if you're using a Strand Glaive, it's going to count as kinetic melee damage, not as Strand melee damage. Which is interesting. Also, I'm not a huge fan of. This does mean that it doesn't benefit from Knockout converting kinetic melees to arc necessarily. Which kind of sucks, but oh well. Probably for the best. Melee damage bonus is no longer decreased when using Peregrine Greaves, Worm Gods, the usual suspects. Knockout uncharged damage bonuses increased from 100% to 160%, and charged melee bonuses is being increased from 50% to 160%, which is great for things like shoulder charge and whatnot. Now works with Glaives. Offensive Bulwark increased from 100 to 60%. Also works with Glaives and it's no longer decreased with Syntheseps. Offensive Bulwark, I think it's going to be more key when using Vexcalibur, because Vexcalibur gives you an overshield pretty quickly. It will have more damage against Vex. If someone heard the raid is going to be Vex, so that could be interesting. The Banner of War is an interesting choice to fucking buff here. Like, what? PvE melee damage bonus, melee damage bonus for the user and allies is increased from 40% to 100%, which is kind of crazy. No longer decreased when using these 3 exotics. However, I'll get into it later, but these are not going to be the premier exotics to be using with Banner. The damage bonus provided by Blade Fury melee's attacks is unchanged, which is interesting. So the super's not really getting changed, but everything else for Banner of War is. Silas Executioner, I'm not familiar with this stuff, so I can't really say much about them, but melee damage bonus is increased from 200 to 300%. Glaives are going to work now, and now works with every melee ability if the melee makes contacts while you are leaving invisibility. In other words, projectile melees like Threaded Spike will benefit from the damage increase if you're using it at point blank, which is interesting. Combination Blow, maximum PvE damage bonus increased from 309% to 400%. Now works with Ascension in PvE at full effect. Now works with Grapple Melees at PvE at full effect, which is kind of crazy. Now, Exotic Armor. Now, I think they mostly hit things that affect melee, so I would not be surprised if certain exotics are getting changed that don't affect melees. So for Hunters, Bungie. Can we please make exotics a little bit easier to fucking say? Because, goddamn, how the fuck Arthritis' Embrace. I'm just gonna call it fucking Arthritis' Embrace. I know there's no fucking T in there, but screw it. Now, this thing, PvE weighted, throwing knife damage bonuses increased from 200 to 300%. Liar's Handshake and Spirit of Liar, basic melee and arc melee damage increased from 200% to 400%. Why? Aphidia Apathe? Do they mean, I don't know what this exotic is. Because I'm not really seeing an exotic that has this name for Hunter. I have no idea what they mean. This might be a typo, but I see no exotic with that name. So I have no idea. Unless it's just random exotic I'm fucking missing, apparently. But whatever this exotic is, maximum PvE throwing knife damage bonus increase from 100 to 200%. Try and vice switches for Glaives. Melee damage bonus increase from 100 to 200%. Titans, Heart of Venomous Light. Melee damage is increased from 200 to 50%, which is nice, I guess, but it's not really going to be used. Now increase the damage of unpowered and glaive melee abilities. I don't see this getting used for melee. That being said, keep in mind this does not affect the Spirit of Inmost, because Spirit of Inmost affects the recharge rate. It does not affect the damage bonus. Peregrine Greaves. Shoulder charge against anything that we actually use it for is increased by a bit. 400%, but most people use this for champions, tormentors, or mini bosses, so the Peregrine is not going to get used. So I'm going to be real here. Syntheseps and Spirit of Syntheseps melee damage bonus, is remaining unchanged. which is interesting. Melee damage bonus is no longer decreased when using combination, stylish, or glaive melees. It is still decreased when using lightning surge. Just keep that in mind. Wishful ignorance, in my opinion, is the go-to exotic to use for Strand Titan, especially if you're gonna spec it to using the melee charges. Because the maximum PvE melee damage bonus is increased from 100% to 200%, and Flechette Storm from 50% to 200%. By the way, that perk says gain an additional Frenzy Blade charge, so it gives you 4. It increased their damage with each strike. Pulses from your Banner of War return melee energy based on the number of allies healed. I believe this counts for yourself as well, but Banner of War also receives some changes as well, so that's something to keep in mind. Worm Gods, increased PvE maximum damage bonus from 25% to 400%. No longer decreased when Roaring Flames or when using Roaring Flames or Glaive melee, which is kind of insane. Warlock's Winter Guile is the only thing that's getting changed for you, 25% to 400% melee damage bonus. Weapon perks close to melee, damage bonus increased is getting doubled. 1-2 punch is getting increase of 100 to 150%. Now works with all melee abilities. Melee damage no longer decrease when using Life's Handshake. Increase the time the perk is active to 3 seconds. Now, Enhance, I believe it lasts for 7 seconds. So I'm curious if this actually lasts. But some exotics, Bastion. Increased PvE melee damage bonus from 100 to 300%. Now works with all melee abilities. This is actually going to be more used for Bonk Hammer. In my opinion, this is the premier exotic to use a Bonk Hammer. Increase the time the perk is active to 3 seconds. Monte Carlo, the Catalyst melee no longer deals reduced damage to bosses and mini-bosses and champions. This is absolutely great. It made no fucking sense that this dealt reduced damage to that. Winter Bite now receives melee damage bonuses from a variety of sources. Reduced enhanced melee damage with ammo to 20% versus bosses, down from 40%. So Winter Bite's getting heavily nerfed, probably because of what they saw from its current stuff. So I do find it interesting that they're buffing Banner of War so much, but hey, I'm excited for it. Exotic armor. It felt natural. Many buffs and reworks here and there, just a few minor. Okay, interesting. For hunters, Dragon Shadow, and they're touching Speedloader slacks as well. Dragon Shadow, which originally what this exotic did was it dodging reloads all weapons and increases both movement and both movement and weapon handling speeds for a brief time. I think this was completely useless. Now passively increases weapon stability and ready speed. Dodging reloads your equipped weapon, no longer reloads holstered weapons. That's a nerf. That's a massive nerf. Activating your dodge ability grants the following effects for a short time. Increase stability, handling, move speed, sprint, slide, ADS straight speed, and class stat. Okay. So this is more so going to be more useful in PvP, not PvE. Now for Speedloader slacks, which are very new. They came out in the final shape, which I find interesting. By default, dodging boosts reload speed, handling, and airborne effectiveness to you and nearby allies while the buff is active. Final blows and dodges increase the buff strength and refresh the timer. Adjusted the type fitting perk. Dodging reloads all weapons and grants increased handling reload speed for your nearby allies while this buff is active. Okay. Dealing sustained damage grants class ability energy. So this part right here is a new part. Mask of Brachyrius, which I think is an interesting exotic to touch. What it does by default is while you have a stasis super equipped, your dodge becomes a longer range, faster moving shift that partially cloaks you during use. After shifting, your stasis and arc weapons deal increased damage for a short time. Oh, this guy has some synergy with the new exotic. But we worked light shift. Oh, wait, effects now are active when either an arc or a stasis super is equipped. We worked light shift. No longer provides a non-stacking surge damage bonus. Interesting. Now it grants a plus 10% damage for eligible weapons. Interesting. And Lord of Wolves. Why is Lord of Wolves included here? Per stack. Stacks up to 3 times while active. Weapon final blows. Grant class ability energy. I find it interesting that Lord of Wolves is there. I don't think it makes any sense, though. Khepri Sting, I believe, was used for bows. Yeah, Khepri Sting, the exotic perk originally says, Punching someone with full melee energy will instantly cast Smoke Bomb. Your Smoke Bombs deal increased damage, regenerate more quickly when stuck on a surface, and grant you true sight after damaging a target. More so PvP. Okay, this was not that. I'm thinking about Oath Keepers. Removed automatic Smoke Bomb activation when using a melee attack. Probably made that annoying. Removed true sight when dealing damage with a Smoke Bomb. Added killing weakened targets, create a burst of weakening smoke. I don't think this moves the needle. I don't think this moves the needle at all. Let me know, hunters, if that's your thing. But Oath Keepers, I believe, was for bows. Original perk says bow charges can be held indefinitely, gain a bonus to the bow's damage when released based on how long the charge is held. Okay. Increased maximum damage bonus from 150 to 200%. Now provides more of the total damage bonus earlier in the overdraw. Which I think is nice. I think this is going to more so increase its potency in PvP. I don't think this affects PvE. Blight Ranger. Blight Ranger has indeed had a rough time. It just struggles to find a niche. But the original exotic perk says, guarding with your arc staff does not consume extra super energy. Then you can cancel arc staff early, temporarily increasing arc weapon damage. Reflected attacks increase the damage of the burst and extended the super and deal additional damage. So they're fixing an issue where cancellation damage is not consistently scaling. Okay. Adjusted voltaic mirror meter behavior. Now requires 25% less reflections to reach maximum. Fills more evenly. Blocked melees now count as a reflection. Maximum cancellation damage increased. Minimum. Okay, so that's stuff. Now always applies blind before dealing damage. That's interesting. I don't really feel like using this. So, but for Titans, aggressive Alpha Loopy by default heals when you place on the barricade. Added additional effects. Sustained damage while behind a barricade triggers another smaller healing burst. Ooh, that's interesting. I feel like that would be useful for Titan as far as Thunder Crash goes, and if you're using Bolt Charge. But I could also see this being used with Void. I don't know. This exotic just needs to be... Healing your allies grants barricade energy. I just don't think that's going to be used that much outside of a swap exotic. I just don't see its usefulness that much. Phoenix Cradle is finally getting changed. Updated VFX on sunspots while the user has Phoenix Cradle to look more clearly supportive to allies. I hope it's either blue or white. One of the two. But preferably I would like blue. Dealing sustained solar weapon damage in a sunspot extends its duration. Providing solar buffs to allies has the chance to create a sunspot at your feet. In my opinion, this is most useful for Crota's End. I do think we're going to have a Vex boss where you're going to have to be close and the boss is going to be immobile. So if you have a Titan not doing damage or having to look out for a separate mechanic, having Phoenix Cradle on Super Ring, extending that sunspot, that sort of stuff, for healing for everybody, I think that could be pretty good. AK-4 Stand-Asides, I don't know anyone that uses this, but sprinting with Juggernaut active periodically grants you a stack of static charge. Sprinting while amplified creates an area behind you that grants ally speed booster. Just doesn't really matter. Path of the Burning Steps, really bad now. Increase solar weapon damage and solar ignition damage based on the number of stacks of Roaring Flame you have. So gains, and also stacks with Surge mods, so thank fuck. So 20%, up to 20% for that, and 50% for ignition damage. Reduces the duration of suspend, slow, and freeze effects applied to you. That's kind of insane. Ambient Leap now increases the duration of suspend with Dranger's Lash. Action Warwick stacks up to 10 times, but they now increase their stability, ammo regeneration, and damage. So if you really like using machine guns as an ad clear thing, that ammo regeneration is going to be absolutely goated. Aggressive Alpha Loopy. Well, Spirit of Alpha Loopy. Added healing your allies grants class ability energy. That's not useful at all. Maybe a thruster. Now Warlock. Starfire Protocol. Now also activates on radiant damage. Now taking a look at Starfire currently, I think Starfire Protocol gets a little bit too much flack. But its current thing is fusion grenades have an additional charge of recharge from empowered weapon damage. With empowered weapon, final blows, granting more energy. So this is going to work with on any damage while you're radiant as well. which for Warlocks is going to be stupidly easy. Increased the fusion grenade energy, from dealing damage from 2.5 to 5%, which is nice. Reduced gain from final blows from 20% to 15%. So it's a nice boost, but not particularly. Wings of Sacred Dawn. Wings of Sacred Dawn is pretty niche, in my opinion. But what it does before is while you have a Solar Super equipped, aiming weapons while you're midair suspends you there for a short time, reducing flinch and granting damage resist. Weapon hits extends the effect's duration. 11 final blows reload your solar weapons from reserves. Commands are now less accurate towards you while Tomb of Dawn is active. Similar to Manticore, that's really good change. That's a great change. So weapon final blows now grant restoration and reload your stowed weapons. Wings of Sacred Dawn is kind of going to be goated now. Damn, that's pretty good. Especially if you're using this with Gjallarhorn or something like that. A more potent... Oh, man, that's good. Fellwinter's Helm. They added an effect, so I'll just reiterate what the Exotic did by default. Powered melee final blows create a burst of energy that weakens nearby targets. Finishers and final blows against more powerful targets increase the radius of the burst and length of the weakening effect. Added powered melee damage weakened targets, which is great. Applies a 15% weaken. Weaken effects applied by the verse are unchanged. Okay. And Prometheus Spur reworked the perk, because what originally did was solar kills. I believe it was when you had Dawnblade specifically, but solar weapon kills or super kills would expend they would use up your class ability charge to spawn a rift that was both healing and empowering. But now they changed it. While a solar super is equipped, weapon defeats grant class ability energy, and defeats in a rift grant a different solar verb. So healing will grant radiant, and empowering will grant cure. Oh, that's pretty nice. That's pretty nice. Boots of the Assembler. I'm not going to list all these changes. They made Noble Seekers better. So I can read all that. Y'all can pause if y'all want to. That's just too much. Geomags. Now, Geomags, I'm not really liking the direction they're going here because the whole bringing back the sprint thing is a little bit of a misnomer. So currently, Geomags, damaging targets with Chaos Reach extends its duration. Collecting ionic traces grant you energy for Chaos Reach. Sprinting while near max bolt charge will grant stacks over time. Reduce super energy gain from ionic traces to 4%. This was unnecessary. I think this section needed to be buffed. Return sprinting to top off bolt charge. Decrease bolt charge stacks required before sprinting will grant additional stacks from 6 to 5. Okay, that's nice. Decrease the amount of time required for sprinting to start grading bolt charge from 2 seconds to 1. Increase the rate bolt charge while this effect is active from 1.5 to 0.33. Damn, that's pretty fast. So that means if you're like at 7 charges, in a second you're getting back up your full bolt charge. Which I guess is nice if you're going for full stuff, I guess. If you want to top off your bolt charge before casting your super, but I don't think this was a good change, in my opinion. But here are the bunch of rewards. Final shape rewards, I guess. If y'all are interested. I'm not going into the known issue stuff. But yeah, those are the exotic changes. Tines are back. Now, y'all might be asking, will you be making a build video or anything like that for day 1? I will be making a build video. However, it's gonna be the day before the raid. The day before the raid is when I'm going to make the build video, and y'all just kind of have to be there. Depending. This massively depends. Because I don't expect us to really get all the information until last minute. So on that note, though, thanks for tuning in, and I will catch y'all on the flip side.